The rain hammered against the windows of the black sedan as it pulled into the circular driveway of the estate. Daniel Thompson stepped out, his expensive suit already dampening in the downpour. He hadn't called ahead. Something had driven him home early from his business trip, an unexplained need to see his daughter Sophie. As he approached the front door, his hands trembled slightly as he inserted his key. The house felt different somehow, warmer than usual, filled with the sound of laughter echoing from the kitchen. "Sophie?" he called out, his voice carrying through the marble foyer. "Daddy?" 8-year-old Sophie came running, her pigtails bouncing as she threw herself into his arms. But as Daniel lifted her up, something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. Red marks scattered across her small arms, some fresh, others fading to pink. "Sophie, what happened to your arms?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper, his worst fears rushing through his mind. Had someone hurt his little girl while he was away making deals and building his empire? Grace Washington, the family's longtime maid and Sophie's caretaker, appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. At 42, Grace had been with the Thompson family for 6 years, ever since Sophie's mother had passed away. Her warm brown eyes immediately registered Daniel's distress. "Mr. Thompson, I can explain," Grace said gently, her voice carrying the same soothing tone that had comforted Sophie through countless nights. "Sophie, honey, why don't you show your daddy what you've been working on?" Sophie wiggled out of Daniel's arms and grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the kitchen. "Come see Daddy. I've been helping Miss Grace with everything so I could earn money for your birthday present." Daniel's legs felt weak as the truth began to dawn on him. These weren't marks of abuse. They were the evidence of his 8-year-old daughter working like a grown-up to buy him a gift. The red marks on her arms were from scrubbing, cleaning, and doing chores that no child should have to do. "You see, Mr. Thompson," Grace explained as they entered the kitchen, "Sophie heard you mention on the phone last month that your birthday was coming up. She asked me how she could earn money to buy you something special. I tried to tell her that wasn't necessary, but you know how determined she can be." Sophie beamed up at her father, completely unaware of the emotional storm raging inside him. "Miss Grace pays me 50 cents for washing dishes, $1 for folding laundry, and $2 for helping clean the big windows in the living room. I've saved up $12.50 so far." Daniel's heart shattered and rebuilt itself in the same moment. Here was his precious daughter, working her small hands raw to show her love for a father who had been too busy building his financial empire to truly be present in her life. And here was Grace, the woman who had stepped seamlessly into the role of mother, encouraging Sophie's loving gesture while probably knowing it broke her heart to watch. "Sophie, sweetheart," Daniel knelt down to her level, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You don't need to work to buy me presents. You being happy and healthy is the only gift I need." "But I want to, Daddy," Sophie insisted. "Miss Grace says when we love someone we show it by what we do, not just what we say. And I love you so, so much." Grace stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Mr. Thompson, I hope you don't mind. I've been teaching Sophie about the value of hard work and earning things, but perhaps I should have asked your permission first." Daniel looked up at Grace, seeing her for perhaps the first time, really seeing her. This woman had been raising his daughter with more love and attention than he had given. She had taught Sophie values, kindness, and the meaning of love through action. And now she stood there, worried that she had overstepped, when in reality she had been everything Sophie needed. "Grace," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've been taking care of Sophie better than I have. You've given her something I never could, a mother's love." Sophie looked between the two adults, sensing the weight of the moment. "Miss Grace takes really good care of me, Daddy. She reads me stories every night, helps me with my homework, and when I had nightmares about Mommy, she held me until I felt better. She's like a mommy but also like my best friend." The simplicity of Sophie's words hit Daniel like a physical blow. While he had been conquering boardrooms and closing million-dollar deals, Grace had been here, being the parent Sophie needed. She had been tucking his daughter in at night, kissing scraped knees and celebrating small victories. "How much do I owe you?" Daniel asked suddenly, his business mind kicking in. "Mr. Thompson?" Grace looked confused. "For taking care of Sophie. For being her mother when I was too selfish to see what she needed. For loving her unconditionally. How much do I owe you?" Grace's eyes widened. "Sir, you don't owe me anything. Caring for Sophie has been my joy, not my job. She's brought more light into my life than you could imagine." Daniel stood up, his decision already made. "Grace, I want to offer you something. Not as payment but as recognition. I want you to be Sophie's official guardian. I want to triple your salary, give you full authority over Sophie's care and education, and I want you to accept it without hesitation. Sophie needs you and frankly, so do I. Grace's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mr. Thompson, I can't possibly. Yes, you can, Sophie chimed in, grabbing Grace's hand. Please say yes, Miss Grace. You're already my family. Sophie's right, Daniel said firmly. You're not our maid, Grace. You're Sophie's mother in every way that matters. And I'm not asking, I'm begging. Please accept this. Let me do right by both of you. Grace looked at Sophie's hopeful face, then at Daniel's earnest expression. The love she had poured into this little girl over the years had never been about money or recognition, but seeing the man she had silently admired finally understand what Sophie needed made her heart soar. I accept, Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. With all my gratitude, I accept. Sophie squealed with delight and hugged both adults, her small arms trying to encompass them both. As Daniel held his daughter and looked at Grace over Sophie's head, he realized that coming home early that day hadn't been a random decision. It had been the universe's way of showing him what real treasure looked like. And it wasn't in his bank account, it was right here in his kitchen, in the love between a little girl and the woman who had chosen to pour her heart into raising her. The next morning, Daniel woke up in his own home for the first time in months. Usually, his visits were brief, a quick hello to Sophie before rushing off to the next meeting or business trip. But today was different. Today he had nowhere else to be except right here. He found Grace in the kitchen, preparing Sophie's breakfast with the same careful attention he had seen her give everything else. She moved with quiet efficiency, cutting fruit into perfect star shapes and arranging them on Sophie's plate in a way that would make the little girl smile. Good morning, Grace, Daniel said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, offering him a warm smile. Good morning, Mr. Thompson. I wasn't sure what time you usually ate breakfast at home, so I prepared coffee and kept some pancakes warm just in case. Daniel felt a pang of shame. Grace didn't know his breakfast routine because he was never home long enough to have one. Thank you. And Grace? Yesterday when I offered you that position, I meant every word. I want you to understand how serious I am about this. Grace set down the spatula and faced him fully. Mr. Thompson, can I ask you something? Daniel, he corrected. Please call me Daniel. And yes, ask me anything. Why now? What changed? Daniel poured himself coffee, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. When I saw those marks on Sophie's arms yesterday for a terrible moment, I thought someone had hurt her. The relief when I learned the truth was overwhelming, but then came something worse. The realization that my 8-year-old daughter felt she needed to work to show me love because I've been so absent from her life. She loves you very much, Daniel, Grace said gently. She talks about you constantly. About your business trips, your successes, how proud she is of her daddy. But I've missed so much, Daniel said, his voice heavy with regret. Her last birthday, most of her school events, bedtime stories, scraped knees, first days of school. You've been here for all of it. Grace moved to the stove, flipping another pancake. Caring for Sophie has never felt like work to me. When my husband died 5 years ago, I thought my world had ended. We never had children of our own, and the grief was suffocating. But then you hired me, and Sophie became the light I didn't know I needed. Daniel set down his coffee cup. Tell me about your husband. A soft smile crossed Grace's face. Marcus was a teacher. He always said that love wasn't something you felt, but something you did. Every day in small ways and big ones. When Sophie started doing chores to earn money for your gift, I heard his voice reminding me that this was love in action. I want to hear more, Daniel said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. Just then, Sophie bounded into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her hair a delightful mess from sleep. Daddy, you're still here. I'm not going anywhere today, sweetheart, Daniel said, scooping her up for a hug. I cleared my entire schedule. Today is all about us. Sophie's eyes went wide with disbelief and joy. Really? No phone calls? No meetings? Not a single one. What would you like to do? Sophie looked at Grace, then back at Daniel. Can Miss Grace do everything with us? Please? I wouldn't have it any other way, Daniel said, and Grace's face lit up with happiness. After breakfast, Sophie led them to her playroom, chattering excitedly about her toys, her drawings, and the stories Grace read to her. Daniel found himself seeing his own home through fresh eyes. Sophie's artwork covering the refrigerator, her small handprints on the lower windows where Grace had lifted her to watch birds, the cozy reading corner Grace had created with pillows and soft blankets. Miss Grace made this for me, Sophie said, pointing to a growth chart painted on the wall with flowers and butterflies. She measures me every month and writes the date. See, I've grown 3 inches since Christmas. Daniel knelt beside the chart, running his fingers over Grace's careful handwriting. Each measurement was accompanied by a small note. Sophie learned to tie her shoes. Sophie's first loose tooth. Sophie read a whole book by herself. You documented everything, Daniel said to Grace, his voice full of wonder. Children grow so fast, Grace replied. I wanted to make sure nothing was forgotten. They spent the morning baking cookies, with Sophie standing on a stool between Daniel and Grace, flour in her hair and chocolate chips somehow ending up everywhere except in the bowl. Grace taught them both how to measure ingredients properly and roll the dough into perfect circles. Miss Grace is the best baker in the whole world, Sophie declared, licking chocolate off her fingers. She makes everything taste like love. What does love taste like? Daniel asked, genuinely curious. Sophie considered this seriously. Warm and sweet and safe. Like when Miss Grace makes hot chocolate after I have a bad dream, or when she puts extra cheese in my grilled cheese sandwich just because she knows I like it. Daniel looked at Grace, who was carefully placing cookies on the baking sheet. Every movement she made was deliberate and caring, whether she was adjusting Sophie's apron or making sure the little girl didn't burn herself on the hot oven. That afternoon, they moved to the living room for what Sophie called art time. Grace had set up an easel and spread newspapers on the floor. She handed Daniel a brush with the same patience she showed Sophie, never making him feel foolish for his clumsy attempts at painting. I'm not very artistic, Daniel admitted as he tried to paint a tree that looked more like a green blob. Art isn't about being perfect, Grace said, guiding Sophie's hand as the little girl painted a rainbow. It's about expressing what's in your heart. What's in your heart, Miss Grace? Sophie asked. Grace paused, her brush hovering over the canvas. She looked at Sophie, then at Daniel, and her smile was radiant. Gratitude, she said simply. My heart is full of gratitude. As the afternoon wore on, Daniel found himself watching Grace as much as he watched Sophie. He noticed how she anticipated Sophie's needs before the child even voiced them. Bringing water before Sophie got thirsty, having a wet cloth ready for messy hands, sitting closer when Sophie needed comfort. Her love was practical and constant, expressed in 1,000 small actions. Grace, Daniel said as they cleaned up the art supplies, Sophie is lucky to have you. But I'm beginning to think I'm the lucky one too. Grace looked up from washing brushes, her cheeks pink. What do you mean? I mean that somehow, in taking care of Sophie, you've been taking care of me too. This house, Sophie's happiness, the stability she has, that's all because of you. You've given us both something I didn't even know we were missing. What's that? Grace asked softly. A home, Daniel said. Not just a house, but a real home. Sophie, who had been listening from her perch at the table, clapped her hands. Does this mean you'll stay home more, Daddy? With me and Miss Grace? Daniel looked at his daughter's hopeful face, then at Grace's gentle eyes, and felt something shift inside his chest. For years, he had thought success meant building an empire, accumulating wealth, conquering new markets. But sitting here in his living room, covered in paint and flour, laughing with his daughter and the woman who loved her unconditionally, he realized he had been measuring success all wrong. Yes, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Daddy's going to be home a lot more. The next few days passed like a dream Daniel never wanted to wake up from. True to his word, he canceled meetings, declined conference calls, and for the first time in years, experienced the simple rhythm of domestic life. He watched Grace move through the house like a gentle force of nature, turning ordinary moments into something magical. Morning routine is very important for children, Grace explained as she helped Sophie get ready for school. Consistency makes them feel secure. Daniel observed from the doorway as Grace helped Sophie choose her outfit, braided her hair, and packed her lunch with care. She slipped a small note into Sophie's lunchbox, something Daniel learned she did every day. What does the note say? Daniel asked. Sophie unfolded it proudly. It says, You are brave, you are kind, you are loved. Have a wonderful day. Miss Grace writes me a different message every single day. Every day. Daniel looked at Grace with amazement. Children need constant reminders of how precious they are, Grace said, adjusting Sophie's backpack. Especially children who have lost a parent. They need to know they're not alone. Daniel's throat tightened. While he had been building his business empire, Grace had been building something far more valuable, his daughter's sense of self-worth and security. After dropping Sophie at school together, Daniel suggested they take a walk through the neighborhood. He wanted to understand how Grace saw their world, what she noticed that he had missed. Sophie loves the flower shop on 5th Street, Grace mentioned as they strolled past colorful storefronts. Every Friday Mrs. Peterson gives her a single daisy to take home. Sophie presses them in a book and writes the date. She calls it her Happy Flower Diary. Daniel had lived in this neighborhood for 8 years and had never noticed the flower shop. "Show me," he said. Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman with silver hair and twinkling eyes, lit up when she saw Grace. "Grace dear, where's our little Sophie today?" "School," Grace replied warmly. "Mrs. Peterson, I'd like you to meet Sophie's father, Daniel Thompson." "Oh my." Mrs. Peterson clasped her hands together. "Sophie talks about her daddy constantly. She says you build important buildings and help people have jobs." Daniel felt a mixture of pride and shame. Sophie saw his work in the best possible light, but he wondered if she wouldn't prefer a daddy who was simply present. "Sophie is such a special child," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Grace has done a wonderful job raising her. That little girl has more manners and kindness than children twice her age." As they walked home, Daniel reflected on Mrs. Peterson's words. Grace had done a wonderful job raising her. His daughter's character, her kindness, her resilience, these were Grace's gifts to Sophie. "Grace, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, Daniel. Do you think Sophie resents me for being away so much?" Grace stopped walking and turned to face him. "Daniel, Sophie adores you. But she also worries about you. She asks me sometimes if you eat enough, if you get lonely in hotel rooms, if you have friends where you travel. She loves you fiercely, but she wishes she could take care of you the way you take care of her." "Take care of me?" In her mind, you work so hard to give her everything she needs. She wishes she could give you something back. That's why earning money for your birthday gift was so important to her. It was her way of showing you the same kind of love you show her. Daniel sat down on a park bench, overwhelmed by the depth of his 8-year-old daughter's love. "I've been so focused on providing for her financially that I never realized she wanted to provide for me emotionally." Grace sat beside him. "Children love with their whole hearts, Daniel. Sophie doesn't care about the size of the house or the expensive toys. She just wants you." "What kind of father does that make me?" Daniel asked, genuinely seeking Grace's opinion. "It makes you human," Grace said gently. "You lost your wife and you threw yourself into work to cope and to provide. There's no shame in that. But Sophie is older now and she needs something different from you." "What does she need?" "She needs to know that she's your priority. Not your only priority but your first priority. She needs to feel that you choose her, every day, even when other things are demanding your attention." Daniel nodded, understanding. "And you? What do you need, Grace?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Me? Yes, you. You've given everything to Sophie, but what about your own dreams, your own needs?" Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching children play on the swings. "When my husband died, I thought my dreams died with him. We had planned to travel, to maybe adopt children, to grow old together. After he passed, I couldn't imagine wanting anything again. But loving Sophie has awakened something in me. I remember what it feels like to hope again, to plan for someone's future, to believe in tomorrow." Daniel studied Grace's profile as she spoke. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with physical features and everything to do with the light that shone from within her. "What do you hope for now?" "I hope that Sophie continues to grow into the amazing person she's becoming. I hope that she always feels loved and secure. And I hope—" Grace paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. "What?" "I hope that someday I might have a family of my own again. Not to replace what I lost, but to honor it by loving again." Daniel felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt since his wife's death, the desire to be part of someone else's dreams. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Daniel found Grace in the kitchen, preparing lunches for the next day. She moved with quiet efficiency, making Sophie's sandwich with extra care, cutting fruit into fun shapes, writing tomorrow's encouraging note. "Grace, can I help?" She looked surprised. "You want to help make lunch?" "I want to learn. I want to be part of Sophie's daily routine." Grace handed him a knife and showed him how to cut apple slices so they wouldn't turn brown. "You dip them in lemon juice just a little. Sophie likes them tart." "How do you know all these things? All these little details that make her happy?" "I pay attention," Grace said simply. "I watch her face when she tastes something new, I listen when she talks about her day, I notice what makes her smile. Love is in the details, Daniel." They worked in comfortable silence, and Daniel found peace in the simple act of preparing his daughter's lunch. When Grace handed him a blank piece of paper, he stared at it uncertainly. For the note, she explained. Every child needs to know they're loved, especially first thing in the morning. Daniel picked up a pen, his hand hovering over the paper. What could he say that would mean as much to Sophie as Grace's daily messages? Finally he wrote, "Sophie, you are my sunshine even on cloudy days. Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky." Grace read it over his shoulder and smiled. She's going to treasure that. As they finished preparing everything for the next day, Daniel realized that this simple act, making his daughter's lunch, writing her a note, thinking about her needs, felt more meaningful than any business deal he had ever closed. Grace. Yes. Thank you. For teaching me how to be a father. Grace's eyes glistened. Thank you, Daniel. For letting me be a mother. In that moment, in the quiet kitchen of his home, surrounded by the evidence of Grace's love and care, Daniel understood that he had found something more valuable than all his business success combined. He had found his way home. Daniel's birthday arrived 3 weeks later, and he woke to the sound of whispered excitement in the hallway. Through his slightly open door, he could hear Sophie and Grace planning something in hushed, conspiratorial tones. "Is it time yet, Miss Grace?" Sophie's voice was barely contained excitement. "Let's wait just a few more minutes, sweetheart. We want to make sure Daddy is fully awake." Daniel smiled, staying perfectly still. He had been looking forward to this day more than any birthday in years, not because of potential gifts, but because he would get to experience it fully present, with the two people who mattered most. Finally there was a gentle knock on his door. "Daddy? Are you awake?" Sophie called softly. "Come in, birthday girl," Daniel replied, then caught himself. "Wait, I'm the birthday boy today." Sophie giggled as she burst through the door, followed by Grace carrying a breakfast tray. Sophie wore her best dress, a yellow sundress with tiny flowers that Grace had helped her pick out specially for the occasion. "Happy birthday, Daddy." Sophie launched herself onto the bed, careful not to disturb the tray Grace was setting down. "Happy birthday, Daniel," Grace said warmly, her smile making his heart skip a beat. The breakfast tray was set with his favorite coffee, perfectly scrambled eggs, toast cut into triangles, and fresh strawberries arranged in the shape of a heart. But what caught his attention was the small wrapped package sitting next to his plate, slightly lopsided and covered in what was clearly Sophie's own wrapping paper artwork. "This is beautiful," Daniel said, sitting up and pulling Sophie close. "You two didn't have to do all this. Miss Grace made the breakfast, but I helped," Sophie announced proudly. "And I have something special for you." Sophie grabbed the small package and thrust it into Daniel's hands, practically bouncing with excitement. "Open it, open it." Daniel carefully unwrapped the gift, taking his time to appreciate Sophie's hand-drawn wrapping paper that featured stick figures of the three of them holding hands. Inside was a small wooden picture frame, painted bright blue with yellow stars around the border. The paint was slightly uneven, with small fingerprints visible in the corners. "I made it myself," Sophie said. "Miss Grace taught me how to use the sandpaper to make it smooth, and then I painted it with my own hands. Do you like it?" "Sophie, I love it," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful frame I've ever seen." "Look inside," Sophie urged. Daniel opened the back of the frame and found a hand-drawn picture. It showed 3 stick figures standing in front of a house with a big sun overhead. The tallest figure wore a tie and held a briefcase. The middle figure wore an apron and had curly hair. The smallest figure stood between them, holding both their hands. At the bottom, in Sophie's careful 8-year-old handwriting, were the words, "My family. Daddy, Miss Grace and me. We are happy together." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Sophie, this is the most precious gift anyone has ever given me." "Really?" Sophie asked, searching his face. "Really and truly. This picture shows me everything that's important in the world." Grace had been standing quietly by the window, but Daniel could see tears in her eyes too. In Sophie's innocent drawing, she had included Grace not as the hired help, but as family. "There's more," Sophie said, pulling a folded piece of construction paper from her pocket. "I wrote you a letter too." Daniel unfolded the paper, decorated with more of Sophie's artwork, flowers, hearts, and rainbows in every color of the crayon box. The letter, written in careful block letters, read, "Dear Daddy, happy birthday. You are the best daddy in the whole world. I'm so happy you stay home more now. I love when we make cookies and paint pictures and read books together. Miss Grace says you work very hard to take care of me. I want to take care of you too. I love you bigger than the sky and deeper than the ocean. Love, your Sophie." P.S. Miss Grace helped me spell some words, but all the love is mine. Daniel pulled Sophie into a tight hug, unable to speak for a moment. When he looked up, Grace was wiping her eyes with a tissue. "Thank you, sweetheart. This is the best birthday letter ever written." "Miss Grace has a present for you too," Sophie announced, looking at Grace expectantly. Grace looked embarrassed. "Sophie, I told you I didn't." "Yes, you do," Sophie insisted. "Show him." Grace hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "It's nothing much," she said quietly, handing it to Daniel. Inside the envelope was a photograph Daniel had never seen before. It showed Sophie at about 6 years old, fast asleep in her bed, clutching a picture of Daniel from a business magazine. On the back, Grace had written, "She falls asleep holding your picture every night when you travel. You are loved more than you know." Daniel stared at the photograph, overwhelmed by the evidence of his daughter's love and Grace's thoughtfulness in capturing it. "Grace," he whispered, how did you?" "I took it one night about a year ago," Grace explained softly. "She had been particularly sad that you were away, and she asked if she could sleep with your picture. I thought someday you might like to know how much you mean to her, even when you're not here." Daniel set the photograph carefully on his nightstand and stood up. "I have something to say to both of you." Sophie and Grace looked at him expectantly. "This birthday has made me realize something important. Sophie, your gifts show me how much love you have in your heart. Grace, your gift shows me how much you care about our happiness. But the greatest gift you've both given me is showing me what really matters." "What really matters, Daddy?" Sophie asked. "Love. Family. Being present for the people who matter most. Sophie, you worked so hard to buy me a present with your own money, and Grace, you've documented every precious moment of our lives together. You've both been giving me gifts every day, the gift of love, patience, and joy." Daniel walked to his dresser and pulled out an envelope he had prepared the night before. "Now I have something for both of you," he said, sitting back down on the bed. "But it's your birthday, Daddy?" Sophie protested. "Sometimes the best part of birthdays is giving gifts, not getting them," Daniel said, echoing words he remembered his wife saying years ago. He handed the envelope to Grace. "Would you please read this out loud?" Grace opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was an official-looking document. She began to read. "To Grace Washington, this document officially appoints you as Sophie Thompson's legal guardian, with full authority over her care, education, and well-being. Furthermore, this document establishes a trust fund in the amount of $500,000 for Grace Washington, in recognition of her devoted care of Sophie Thompson and her invaluable contribution to our family." Grace's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the paper. "Daniel, I can't, this is too much." "There's more," Daniel said gently. Grace continued reading, her voice barely a whisper. "Additionally, Grace Washington is hereby named as the primary beneficiary of Sophie Thompson's inheritance, should anything happen to Daniel Thompson, ensuring that Sophie will always be cared for by the person who loves her most." "What does it all mean?" Sophie asked, looking between the adults. Daniel knelt down to Sophie's level. "It means that Miss Grace is officially part of our family now. She has the same rights as a parent to take care of you. And if anything ever happened to me, she would make sure you were always loved and cared for." Sophie threw her arms around Grace's waist. "Miss Grace, now you're really my mommy." Grace was crying too hard to speak. She held Sophie tightly while looking at Daniel with an expression of shock, gratitude, and something else. Something that made Daniel's heart race. "Why?" Grace finally managed to ask. "Why would you do this?" Daniel stood up and moved closer to them both. "Because Sophie drew a picture of our family and she was right. We are a family, Grace. You love Sophie like she's your own daughter, and she loves you like you're her mother. This just makes it official. But the money, the trust fund. I never expected." "Grace," Daniel said firmly, "you've devoted 6 years of your life to raising my daughter. You've put your own dreams on hold to make sure she had everything she needed. You've been mother, teacher, friend, and guardian. That's not employment, that's love. And love this pure, this selfless, deserves to be honored." Sophie was still hugging Grace, but she was looking up at her father with shining eyes. "Daddy, does this mean Miss Grace will never have to go away?" "Never," Daniel promised. "Grace is family now, forever and always." Grace finally found her voice, though it was thick with tears. "I accept," she whispered. "With all my heart, I accept." Daniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. For the first time since his wife's death, his daughter would have the security of knowing she was truly loved and protected. "Now," Daniel said, wiping his own eyes, "I believe someone mentioned something about birthday cake?" Sophie clapped her hands. We made it yesterday while you were on your conference call. It's chocolate with vanilla frosting, just how you like it. As they headed downstairs together, Daniel carrying his breakfast tray and Sophie skipping ahead, Grace walking beside him, Daniel realized that this birthday had given him something more valuable than any business deal or financial success ever could. It had given him the certainty that his daughter would always be surrounded by love, and the beginning of something new and wonderful in his own heart. The kitchen had been transformed. Streamers hung from the ceiling, balloons bobbed in the corners, and in the center of the table sat a slightly lopsided but beautifully decorated chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Daddy" written in careful frosting letters. "Miss Grace let me help with everything," Sophie announced proudly. "I put on all the sprinkles myself." The cake was indeed covered in an enthusiastic amount of rainbow sprinkles, clearly applied by small, eager hands. Daniel thought it was the most beautiful cake he had ever seen. "It's perfect," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Over the following weeks, Daniel found himself genuinely curious about Grace in a way that surprised him. He had known her for 6 years, but realized he knew very little about who she was beyond her role in Sophie's life. Now that she was officially part of their family, he wanted to understand the woman who had shaped his daughter with such love and wisdom. "Tell me about your childhood," Daniel said one evening after Sophie had gone to bed. They were sitting in the living room, Grace mending one of Sophie's school uniforms while Daniel reviewed some documents that couldn't wait until tomorrow. Grace looked up from her sewing, seeming surprised by the question. "My childhood?" "Yes. Where did you grow up? What were your parents like?" "I realize I know so little about the woman who's been raising my daughter." Grace set down her needle and thread, a soft smile crossing her face. "I grew up in South Carolina in a small town called Somerville. My parents, James and Ruth Washington, owned a small restaurant. Nothing fancy, just good home cooking that brought the community together." "That explains why you're such an amazing cook," Daniel observed. "Sophie always tells people that your cooking tastes like love." Grace laughed gently. "My mother used to say that food prepared with love could heal anything. Broken hearts, hurt feelings, even broken bones if you believed hard enough." "Do you still cook the recipes she taught you?" "Every day. The mac and cheese Sophie loves so much was my grandmother's recipe. The chicken soup I make when she's sick came from my mother. Even the birthday cake we made you. That's a family recipe that's been passed down for 3 generations." Daniel felt moved by the realization that Grace had been sharing her family traditions with Sophie, giving his daughter roots and heritage through food and stories. "What made you decide to move up north?" Daniel asked. Grace's expression grew more serious. "College, initially. I got a scholarship to study education at NYU. I wanted to be a teacher like my husband would later become. But after graduation I met Marcus and we built our life here." "You wanted to be a teacher?" "I dreamed of teaching elementary school. I loved the idea of shaping young minds, of being the teacher who made learning magical for children." Grace's eyes grew distant. "Marcus and I talked about how wonderful it would be, both of us working with children, maybe having our own classroom stories to share at dinner." Daniel felt a pang of guilt. "Grace, you gave up your teaching career to take care of Sophie." "I didn't give it up, Daniel. I redirected it. Teaching Sophie, watching her learn and grow, helping her navigate friendships and fears. That's been the most rewarding education experience I could have imagined. But still you had other dreams." Grace picked up her sewing again, her movements thoughtful. "When Marcus died, I thought all my dreams died with him. We had planned to adopt children after a few years of marriage. We had names picked out, a nursery planned, college funds started. When the doctors told us Marcus had cancer, all those dreams felt cruel." Daniel set aside his papers completely, giving Grace his full attention. "How did you survive losing him?" "Honestly, some days I wasn't sure I would. The grief was suffocating. I couldn't imagine a future without him, couldn't see the point in making plans or having hope." Grace's voice was soft but steady. "When you hired me to take care of Sophie, I thought it would just be a job, something to pay the bills while I figured out how to rebuild my life. What changed?" Grace's face lit up with the same warmth Daniel had seen so many times when she looked at Sophie. "The first night I stayed late because Sophie had a fever. You were out of town and she was so scared and miserable. I held her while she slept, and for the first time since Marcus died I felt useful, needed, like maybe there was still purpose in my life." "Sophie saved you as much as you saved her," Daniel realized. "In many ways, yes. Loving her taught me that my heart was still capable of love, that losing Marcus hadn't broken me permanently. Sophie showed me that there are many different ways to build a family, many different ways to find happiness. Daniel found himself leaning forward, drawn into Grace's story. What makes you happiest now? Grace considered the question carefully. Small moments. Sophie's laugh when she discovers something new. The way she runs to show me her artwork from school. Reading together on rainy afternoons. Teaching her to braid her hair or helping her write thank you notes. Grace paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. And lately, watching you discover the joy of being present with her. Seeing you become the father she's always believed you were. What do you mean? Sophie has always talked about you like you were the most wonderful father in the world, even when you were traveling constantly. She would tell her friends at school about her daddy who built important buildings and helped people have jobs. She never complained about you being away, she just treasured the time you were here. Daniel felt his throat tighten. I didn't deserve that kind of faith. But you're living up to it now, Grace said gently. Children have a way of seeing the potential in people, not just their current reality. Sophie always saw your heart, Daniel. She just waited for you to see it too. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the gentle tick of the grandfather clock and the soft rustle of Grace's sewing. Grace, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever think about getting married again? Having children of your own? Grace's hands stilled on her sewing. I used to think that would be impossible. That loving Marcus was a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and that trying to love someone else would somehow diminish what we had. And now I think Marcus would want me to be happy. He always said that love multiplies, it doesn't divide. The love I have for Sophie doesn't take away from the love I had for Marcus, it honors it. So you're open to the possibility? Grace met his eyes directly. I'm open to many possibilities I never thought I'd consider again. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace crackling nearby. Grace, I want you to know that whatever dreams you put aside to take care of Sophie, whatever goals you haven't pursued yet, I want to help you achieve them. Not as an employer but as family. What do you mean? If you still want to teach, we can make that happen. If you want to travel, we can arrange it. If you want to go back to school, pursue other interests, anything, I want to support that. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, you're already giving me more than I ever dreamed of. A stable income, security, the legal protection of being Sophie's guardian. But what about your dreams, Grace? Your personal happiness. Grace set down her sewing and looked at him with an expression so tender it made his heart skip. Daniel, my personal happiness is sitting right here in this room. It's the sound of Sophie's laughter echoing through this house. It's family dinners and bedtime stories and birthday cakes covered in too many sprinkles. It's watching you discover the joy of being a present father. It's this conversation, this connection, this feeling that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. But surely you want more than just taking care of us? Grace smiled. Who says taking care of the people you love is settling for less? Daniel, I wake up every morning grateful for the privilege of loving Sophie. And lately... She paused, her cheeks reddening again. Lately what? Lately I've been grateful for the privilege of watching you become the man Sophie always believed you were. And that's given me hope that maybe, just maybe, my story isn't over yet. Maybe the best chapters are still to come. Daniel felt his heart begin to race. In Grace's words, he heard possibility, hope, and something that sounded remarkably like affection directed not just at Sophie but at him. Grace, he said softly, I hope so too. The changes in the Thompson household didn't happen overnight, but they were unmistakable. Daniel rearranged his schedule to be home for dinner every night, and those evening meals became the cornerstone of their new family rhythm. Grace cooked with the same love she always had, but now Daniel helped set the table. Sophie shared stories from school, and they lingered over dessert, talking and laughing long after the dishes were cleared. Tell us about your day, Daddy, became Sophie's nightly request, and Daniel found himself sharing not just the successes, but the challenges and funny moments from his work. Grace listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and offering perspectives that often helped him see problems in new ways. You know, Daniel said one evening as they cleaned up together, I never realized how much I needed this normalcy, this connection. Grace handed him a dish to dry. What do you mean? For years I thought home was just the place I came to rest between business trips. But this, cooking together, talking about our days, helping Sophie with homework, this is what home actually feels like. Sophie, who was at the kitchen table working on a math worksheet, looked up from her pencil. Daddy, Miss Grace taught me that home isn't a place, it's the people who love you. Is that so? Daniel asked, exchanging a warm glance with Grace. She said home is wherever your family is, and family is the people who take care of each other and want each other to be happy. Daniel knelt down beside Sophie's chair. And who's in our family, sweetheart? Sophie pointed confidently. You, me, and Miss Grace. We take care of each other. That's right, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. We do take care of each other. Later that evening, after Sophie was tucked into bed with her nightly story and goodnight kisses from both adults, Daniel found Grace in the kitchen preparing tomorrow's lunch and snacks. Can I help? He asked, a question that had become routine over the past few weeks. Always, Grace replied, handing him Sophie's lunchbox to pack. They worked in comfortable silence, each knowing their role in this small but meaningful ritual. Daniel had learned Sophie's preferences: extra cheese on her sandwiches, apple slices but no grapes, crackers in a separate container so they stayed crispy. Grace, Daniel said as he wrote Sophie's daily encouraging note, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? Really, truly happy with how things are now? Grace paused in her preparation of Sophie's afternoon snack. Daniel, I've never been happier in my life. But can I ask why you're asking? Because I want to make sure I'm not being selfish. You've reorganized your entire life around Sophie and me. You're here every day taking care of us, making our lives better. But what about your life? Your needs? Grace set down the container she was filling and turned to face him fully. Daniel, do you remember what I told you about my husband? About how he said love is something you do, not something you feel. Yes. Every day I spend with you and Sophie feels like I'm doing love. Making breakfast feels like love. Reading bedtime stories feels like love. Teaching Sophie to tie her shoes or helping her with a difficult homework problem. That's love in action. But surely you have needs beyond taking care of us? Grace's cheeks colored slightly. My needs are being met in ways I never expected. What do you mean? I need to feel useful and Sophie makes me feel essential. I need to feel appreciated and you both express gratitude every day. I need intellectual stimulation, and helping Sophie learn and watching her mind grow provides that. I need emotional connection, and this family gives me more love than I ever thought possible. Daniel stepped closer. And personally? What about your personal needs? Grace's breath caught slightly. What are you asking, Daniel? I'm asking if you're fulfilled, if you're content, if there's anything missing from your life that I could help provide. Grace looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel could see something shifting in her expression. A recognition, a decision being made. There is one thing, she said softly. Tell me. Whatever it is, if it's in my power to give it to you, I will. I need to know that this is permanent. That Sophie and I will always be together no matter what happens. That this family we've built is real and lasting. Grace, I've already made you her legal guardian. I've ensured financially that you'll always be able to care for her. What more can I do to prove this is permanent? Grace took a deep breath. I need to know that you won't get tired of domestic life and go back to traveling constantly. I need to know that when Sophie is older and maybe doesn't need as much daily care, there will still be a place for me in this family. Daniel felt his heart clench at the vulnerability in Grace's voice. Grace, look at me. She raised her eyes to his. You are not here temporarily. You are not here conditionally. You are here because you're family, and family doesn't have expiration dates. But what if you remarry someday? What if you find someone you want to share your life with? Daniel stepped even closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in Grace's brown eyes. Grace, what if I told you I already have? Grace's eyes widened. What? What if I told you that these past few weeks have shown me what I want my life to look like? What if I said that watching you love Sophie has made me realize what real love looks like? What if I admitted that coming home every day to you and Sophie feels like the greatest success I've ever achieved? Grace's hands flew to her mouth. Daniel, what are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between watching you braid Sophie's hair and seeing you cry over those legal documents, between learning to pack school lunches and sharing quiet conversations after bedtime, I've fallen in love with you, Grace Washington. Grace stared at him, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. I'm saying that when Sophie drew that picture of our family, she wasn't drawing a fantasy. She was drawing the truth. We are a family, Grace. And I don't want to just be Sophie's father and your employer. I want to be your partner, your companion, your person. Daniel, Grace whispered, are you sure? This isn't just gratitude for how I've cared for Sophie? Daniel reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. Grace, I'm grateful for how you've loved Sophie, but I'm in love with who you are. I'm in love with your kindness, your wisdom, your strength. I'm in love with how you see the best in people, how you make every ordinary moment special, how you love without condition or reservation. But we're so different. You're successful, wealthy, educated. And you're wise, compassionate, and you've taught me more about what matters in life than any business school ever could. Grace, you've made me a better man and a better father. You've shown me what home feels like. Grace was crying freely now, but her smile was radiant. I love you too, Daniel. I've been trying so hard not to feel it, because I was afraid it would complicate things for Sophie, but I love you so much it takes my breath away. Daniel pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the rightness of having her in his embrace. Nothing will be complicated for Sophie, he murmured against her hair. She already sees us as a family. We're just making it official. Grace pulled back to look at him. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Daniel smiled, his heart full of joy and certainty. I'm asking if you'll marry me, Grace. If you'll be my wife, Sophie's mother, and the heart of our family forever. Yes, Grace whispered, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. Yes, yes, yes. From the top of the stairs came a small gasp, and they looked up to see Sophie in her pajamas, her hands clasped over her mouth in delight. Sophie, Daniel called. How long have you been listening? Sophie ran down the stairs and threw herself into their arms. Long enough to hear the best news ever. Miss Grace is going to be my real mommy, and you're going to be married, and we're going to be a real family forever and ever. Daniel and Grace laughed, wrapping Sophie in their embrace. We're already a real family, sweetheart, Grace said, kissing the top of Sophie's head. This just makes it official. Can I be the flower girl at your wedding? Sophie asked excitedly. You'll be the most important flower girl in the history of weddings, Daniel promised. As they stood there in the kitchen holding each other tight, Daniel realized that this was the moment his life truly began. Not when he made his first million, not when he closed his biggest deal, but now, in this simple room, surrounded by the love of his daughter and the woman who had taught them both what family really meant. The next morning, Daniel woke with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in years. The memory of Grace's kiss, her whispered yes, and Sophie's delighted squeals filled him with a joy that seemed to radiate from his very soul. But as he lay in bed, watching the sunrise paint his bedroom walls in soft gold, he realized that proposing to Grace was just the beginning. He wanted to do this right, to honor both Grace and Sophie with a proposal that celebrated not just his love for Grace, but their commitment to being a family. At breakfast, Sophie was practically vibrating with excitement. When is the wedding? She asked before Daniel had even finished pouring his coffee. Sophie, honey, Grace said gently, her cheeks pink from the night before, we just got engaged last night. We need time to plan properly. But I want to start practicing being a flower girl right now, Sophie declared. Can I wear a princess dress? Can I throw rose petals? Can I carry a basket? Daniel and Grace exchanged amused glances over Sophie's head. Yes to all of the above, Daniel said, ruffling Sophie's hair. But first, we need to make sure Grace has a proper engagement ring. Grace looked up from buttering Sophie's toast. Daniel, I don't need. Yes, you do, Daniel interrupted gently. You deserve to have something beautiful that shows the world you're loved and cherished. Can we pick it out together? Sophie asked. Please? I want to help choose Mommy Grace's ring. The word mommy made both adults pause, their eyes filling with tears of joy. I think that's a perfect idea, Daniel said. This afternoon after school we'll go ring shopping as a family. That afternoon found them at the city's most elegant jewelry store. Sophie pressed against the glass cases in wonder while Grace looked slightly overwhelmed by the sparkling displays. Everything is so beautiful, Grace murmured. And so expensive. Grace, Daniel said, taking her hand, money is just a tool. It can't buy love or happiness, but it can honor the love we already have. Let me honor you properly. The jeweler, an elderly man named Mr. Chin, approached with a knowing smile. Looking for engagement rings? I can always tell, you have that happy glow. We want something perfect for our mommy, Sophie announced importantly. She takes care of us and loves us and makes the best cookies in the world. Mr. Chen's eyes twinkled. Well, then we need something very special indeed. What style appeals to you, miss? Grace looked helplessly at the cases. I honestly don't know. I've never really thought about engagement rings. Tell me about yourself, Mr. Chin suggested. What do you love? What makes you feel beautiful? Grace thought for a moment. I love simple things. Sunrises, flowers, Sophie's laughter, the feeling of making something with my own hands. Mr. Chin nodded thoughtfully and moved to a different case. I think I have just the thing. He pulled out a ring that made Sophie gasp and Grace's eyes fill with tears. It was elegant but not ostentatious. A beautiful solitaire diamond in a classic setting, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught the light like scattered stardust. The center stone represents your love, Mr. Chin explained, and the smaller diamonds represent all the small moments of joy that make a life together beautiful. It's perfect, Grace whispered. Try it on, Daniel urged. The ring fit perfectly, and Grace held her hand up to the light, watching the diamonds sparkle. Do you love it, Mommy Grace? Sophie asked anxiously. I love it more than I can say, Grace replied, her voice thick with emotion. Then it's the one, Daniel said without hesitation. We'll take it. As Mr. Chin prepared the paperwork, Daniel pulled Grace aside. Grace, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What is it? I want to give you more than just financial security. I want to give you the chance to pursue your dreams too. What would make you truly happy? Grace looked confused. Daniel, I am truly happy. You and Sophie make me happy. But what about your own goals? Your own aspirations? You mentioned wanting to teach. Grace was quiet for a long moment, watching Sophie chat excitedly with Mr. Chen about wedding flowers. There is something, she said finally. Tell me. I've always dreamed of opening a small school. Nothing big or fancy, but a place where children could learn with love and individual attention. A place where learning was joyful, where every child felt valued and important. Daniel felt his heart swell with admiration. Tell me more. I imagined it would be an old house, converted into classrooms but still feeling like home. There would be gardens where children could learn about plants and nature. A kitchen where they could learn to cook and understand nutrition. Art studios, a library with reading nooks, maybe even a small playground. How many children? Maybe 20 or 30 total, small classes where every child gets personal attention. Where teachers really know each student's strengths and challenges. Daniel was quiet for so long that Grace began to look worried. It's just a dream, she said quickly. I don't expect. Grace, Daniel interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. What if I told you we could make that dream real? What? What if I said that as my wedding gift to you, I want to help you build that school? What if we found the perfect house, hired the best teachers, created exactly the kind of learning environment you've imagined? Grace stared at him in shock. Daniel, that would cost money. I'm happy to invest in something that would bring you joy and help children learn. Grace, you've given Sophie the most beautiful education in love and values. Think of how many other children could benefit from your wisdom and care. But I'm not qualified to run a school. I never finished my education degree. So we'll make sure you get the credentials you need. We'll hire experienced administrators to help. We'll do whatever it takes to make your dream a reality. Grace's eyes filled with tears. You would really do that for me? Grace, I would do anything for you. But more than that, I believe in you. I've watched you teach Sophie with patience, creativity, and love. You have a gift, and the world deserves to benefit from it. Sophie bounded over to them, having finished her conversation with Mr. Chen. What are you two talking about? You look all serious and happy at the same time. Daddy wants to help me build a school, Grace said, her voice full of wonder. A school? Sophie's eyes went wide. Like where I go. A special school, Grace explained, where children learn in small groups with lots of individual attention. Will you be my teacher? Sophie asked hopefully. Grace and Daniel laughed. If your daddy agrees, you could certainly attend. That would be the best thing ever. Sophie declared. Mommy Grace is the best teacher in the world. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, Daniel and Grace sat in the living room making lists of everything they would need to research about opening a school. Licensing requirements, curriculum development, teacher hiring, building specifications. I can't believe you're willing to do this, Grace said, looking up from her notes. To invest in my dream like this. Grace, when you love someone, their dreams become your dreams. Your happiness is my happiness. Besides, Daniel smiled, I have a feeling this school is going to be amazing. You're going to change children's lives. We're going to change children's lives, Grace corrected. This is our project now. Daniel reached over and took her hand, the engagement ring catching the lamplight. Our first project as an engaged couple. The first of many, I hope, Grace said softly. Definitely the first of many, Daniel agreed, bringing her hand to his lips to kiss her ring finger. We have a lifetime of dreams to make come true together. As they sat there planning their future, surrounded by the warmth of their home and the promise of tomorrow, Daniel realized that success wasn't measured in dollars or deals closed. Success was this, sitting with the woman he loved, planning ways to make the world better, knowing that upstairs their daughter slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was cherished. This was what it meant to be truly wealthy. The weeks following their engagement were filled with a new kind of joy that seemed to permeate every corner of the Thompson home. Daniel found himself looking forward to coming home each day with an anticipation that had nothing to do with rest and everything to do with being with Grace and Sophie. "You're glowing," his business partner Robert mentioned during a board meeting. "Whatever you're doing differently, keep it up. You seem happier than I've seen you in years." Daniel smiled, thinking of the morning he just shared with Grace and Sophie, breakfast together, helping Sophie find her missing homework, sharing a quiet moment with Grace over coffee while Sophie brushed her teeth. "I've finally figured out what's important," Daniel replied simply. Back at home, Grace was experiencing her own transformation. The security of knowing she was truly part of the family, combined with Daniel's unwavering support for her dreams, had given her a confidence she hadn't possessed since before Marcus's death. "Miss Grace, you're singing again," Sophie observed one afternoon as Grace prepared dinner, humming while she chopped vegetables. "Am I?" Grace asked, genuinely surprised. "You used to sing sometimes when you cooked, but then you stopped for a long time. Now you're singing again and it makes me happy." Grace paused in her chopping, realizing Sophie was right. She had been singing, unconsciously, naturally, the way people do when their hearts are light. "I guess I have a lot to sing about these days," Grace said, pulling Sophie into a flower-dusted hug. That evening, as had become their routine, Daniel arrived home just as Grace was putting the finishing touches on dinner. But instead of his usual quick hello and change of clothes, he wrapped his arms around Grace from behind as she stood at the stove, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How was your day, beautiful?" he murmured against her ear. Grace leaned back into his embrace, marveling at how natural this felt, how right. "Wonderful. Sophie and I started planning the garden we want to plant this spring. She has very strong opinions about which flowers we should grow." "All good opinions, I'm sure," Daniel said, breathing in the scent of Grace's hair, vanilla and lavender and something uniquely her. "Daddy? Mommy Grace." Sophie called from the dining room. "Come see what I made." They found Sophie standing proudly beside the dinner table, which she had set with unusual care. The plates were perfectly aligned, the napkins folded into triangular shapes, and in the center of the table was a small vase holding 3 daisies from the garden. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Grace said, genuinely touched. "I wanted to make it special because we're a real family now," Sophie explained. Mrs. Peterson at the flower shop said families should celebrate every day, not just special occasions. Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You're absolutely right, Sophie. Every day with our family is worth celebrating." As they sat down to dinner, Daniel found himself studying Grace across the table. The woman who had once seemed simply kind and capable now revealed new layers of depth and beauty every day. Tonight, she was teaching Sophie about different types of clouds, turning a simple observation about the weather into a fascinating lesson that had Sophie completely engaged. "Cumulus clouds are the fluffy ones that look like cotton balls," Grace was explaining. "And stratus clouds are the flat, gray ones that cover the whole sky." "What about the really high, wispy ones?" Sophie asked. "Those are cirrus clouds. They're made of ice crystals because they're so high up where it's very cold." Daniel marveled at Grace's ability to turn any moment into a learning opportunity, her patience with Sophie's endless questions, her genuine enthusiasm for sharing knowledge. After dinner, while Sophie worked on homework at the kitchen table, Daniel and Grace cleaned up together. It was during these quiet moments that Daniel found himself falling deeper in love with Grace every day. "You're staring," Grace said softly, smiling as she handed him a dish to dry. "I'm admiring," Daniel corrected. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am." "Lucky how?" "Lucky that Sophie needed a caregiver 6 years ago. Lucky that you needed a job. Lucky that you both waited for me to come to my senses." Grace's cheeks pinked. "I wasn't waiting exactly. I was just hoping." "Hoping for what?" Grace was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "Hoping that someday you'd see me as more than just Sophie's caregiver. Hoping that someday this house would feel like home to you the way it did to me." Daniel set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. "Grace, when did you first realize you had feelings for me?" Grace's blush deepened. "Honestly? About 2 years ago. You came home early from a business trip because Sophie had the flu. I was up with her all night, and when you walked in the next morning and found us both asleep on the couch, you looked at us with such tenderness. You kissed Sophie's forehead and whispered, 'Thank you' to me while you thought I was still sleeping. You were awake? I was. And in that moment, I realized that taking care of Sophie wasn't just my job anymore. It was my calling. And you weren't just my employer, you were the man I was falling in love with. Daniel reached out and cupped Grace's face in his hands. 2 years? You kept those feelings hidden for 2 years. I had to. Sophie's well-being had to come first. I couldn't risk my feelings complicating her stability. And now I know that loving you doesn't complicate Sophie's life, it completes it. She's been hoping for this as much as I have. Daniel leaned down and kissed Grace softly, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms, how right this felt. You but also yay, came Sophie's voice from the kitchen table. They broke apart, laughing, to find Sophie grinning at them over her math homework. Sophie Elizabeth Thompson, Grace said in mock sternness, are you spying on us? I'm not spying, I'm observing, Sophie said with 8-year-old logic. Mrs. Rodriguez at school says good scientists observe everything. And I observe that you two are very much in love. Very much, Daniel agreed, pulling Grace closer to his side. Good, Sophie said with satisfaction. Because I've been praying every night that Daddy would realize how perfect Mommy Grace is for us. You have? Grace asked, touched. Every single night. I asked God to help Daddy see that you already love us like family, and that maybe he could love you back the same way. Daniel knelt down beside Sophie's chair. Well, God definitely answered your prayers, sweetheart. I know, Sophie said confidently. I told God that if he helped make us a real family, I would be extra good and help with chores without being asked. Grace laughed. Sophie, you're already extra good. And you're going to be the most wonderful daughter I could ever ask for. And you're going to be the most wonderful mommy, Sophie replied, launching herself into Grace's arms. As Daniel watched his daughter and fiancée embrace, he felt a completeness he had never experienced before. This was what happiness looked like, not the temporary high of closing a business deal or receiving recognition, but the deep, steady joy of being exactly where you belonged with the people who mattered most. Later that evening, after Sophie was tucked into bed with extra kisses and excitement about the upcoming wedding, Daniel and Grace settled into their favorite spot on the living room couch. Grace curled up beside Daniel, her head on his shoulder, her engagement ring catching the soft lamplight. Daniel, Grace said softly, can I tell you something? Always. I've never been happier in my entire life. Not even during the best days with Marcus. This happiness feels different, deeper, more complete. Daniel tightened his arms around her. Tell me what you mean. With Marcus, our love was young and hopeful, full of dreams about the future. It was beautiful, but it was also theoretical. We were planning a life together, imagining what it would be like to have children, to build a family. Grace paused, gathering her thoughts. But with you and Sophie, I'm not dreaming about having a family, I'm living it. Every day I wake up and get to love a child who calls me mommy, who needs me, who has become the center of my world. And I get to love a man who sees me not as I might be someday, but as I am right now. Daniel pressed a kiss to the top of her head. How do I see you? You see me as Sophie's mother, as your partner, as someone worthy of respect and love and dreams coming true. You don't love me despite my past or because of my potential. You love me exactly as I am, right now, in this moment. Grace, you are everything I never knew I needed. You're wise and kind and patient. You're the most natural mother I've ever seen, and you've made me a better father just by watching you love Sophie. And you've made me believe in love again. Not just romantic love, but the love of family, the love of belonging somewhere, the love of knowing that tomorrow will be even better than today. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply enjoying the peace of being together. Finally, Grace spoke again. Daniel, are you sure about the school? It's such a big investment, and there's no guarantee it will succeed. Grace, do you remember what you told Sophie about taking care of people you love? That love is something you do, not just something you feel? Exactly. Supporting your dreams, investing in your vision for helping children. That's how I do love. That's how I show you that I believe in you, that I'm committed to your happiness. Grace lifted her head to look at him. But what if I fail? What if I'm not good enough to run a school? Daniel cupped her face in his hands. Grace Washington, you have raised my daughter with more wisdom, patience, and love than any trained teacher could provide. You've turned our house into a home, our routines into traditions, our family dinners into the highlight of my day. You have exactly the skills and heart needed to create something beautiful for other children. You really believe that? I believe in you completely. And even if the school doesn't work out exactly as we plan, even if we have to adjust our vision or try a different approach, it will still be worth it because it's your dream, and your dreams matter to me. Grace's eyes filled with tears of gratitude and love. How did I get so lucky? We all got lucky, Daniel said, thinking of Sophie sleeping peacefully upstairs, secure in the knowledge that she was loved beyond measure. We found each other exactly when we needed to. 3 months later, on a perfect spring morning, the Thompson garden was transformed into a wedding venue that looked like something from a fairy tale. Grace had insisted on a small, intimate ceremony, just family and close friends. But Daniel had spared no expense in making every detail beautiful. White chairs were arranged in neat rows facing an archway covered in Grace's favorite flowers, white roses, baby's breath, and the daisies that Sophie loved so much. String lights hung from the trees, ready to twinkle as evening approached, and a small string quartet played soft classical music as guests arrived. Daniel stood at the altar, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their slight trembling. He had faced hostile takeovers and million-dollar negotiations without breaking a sweat, but the thought of marrying Grace, of making their family official, had his heart racing with joy and anticipation. "You look nervous, Daddy," Sophie whispered, appearing at his side in her flower girl dress, a confection of pale yellow tulle that made her look like a small princess. "I'm not nervous, sweetheart. I'm excited." "Me too." Sophie bounced slightly on her toes. "I can't wait to call her mommy for real." The music changed, signaling the start of the ceremony. First came Grace's sister Maria, who had flown in from South Carolina to serve as matron of honor. She smiled warmly at Daniel as she took her place, having spent the weekend getting to know the man her sister loved and wholeheartedly approving of the match. Then Sophie began her walk down the aisle, scattering rose petals with serious concentration, her little face glowing with importance and joy. When she reached the altar, she gave Daniel a thumbs up and took her place beside Maria. Finally, the bridal march began, and Grace appeared at the far end of the garden path. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Grace wore a simple but elegant ivory dress that flowed around her like liquid silk. Her hair was styled in loose curls with small white flowers tucked throughout, and she carried a bouquet of white roses and daisies, Sophie's contribution to the wedding planning. But it wasn't the dress or the flowers that made Daniel's eyes fill with tears. It was the radiant smile on Grace's face, the joy that seemed to emanate from every part of her being as she walked toward him, toward their new life together. Grace's father, James Washington, walked beside her with obvious pride. When they reached the altar, he kissed Grace's cheek and shook Daniel's hand warmly. "Take care of my daughter," he said quietly. "With my life," Daniel replied and meant every word. The ceremony was officiated by Pastor Williams from the community church Grace had attended since moving to the neighborhood. He had watched Grace care for Sophie over the years and had seen firsthand the love that had grown between this unlikely family. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, "we are gathered here today not just to witness the marriage of Daniel and Grace, but to celebrate the formation of a family built on love, commitment, and faith." Daniel barely heard the opening words of the ceremony. He was lost in Grace's eyes, in the way she looked at him like he was her whole world, in the knowledge that in just a few minutes she would officially be his wife. "Daniel," Pastor Williams said, "do you take Grace to be your wife, to love and cherish in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Daniel said, his voice strong and clear. "With all my heart, I do." "Grace, do you take Daniel to be your husband, to love and cherish in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Grace whispered, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. "And Sophie," Pastor Williams said, turning to the little girl who was practically vibrating with excitement, "do you accept Grace as your mother and Daniel as your father, promising to love and honor them as your family?" Sophie's face lit up like the sun. "I do. I definitely, absolutely, completely do." The small gathering laughed, charmed by Sophie's enthusiasm. Daniel and Grace exchanged rings, simple gold bands engraved with the date and the words "Forever Family." And then Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," he said with a smile. Daniel cupped Grace's face in his hands and kissed her softly, pouring all his love and gratitude and joy into that single moment. When they broke apart, Grace was laughing and crying at the same time. "And now," Pastor Williams announced, "I'd like to present Mr. and Mrs. Thompson and their daughter Sophie." The guests erupted in applause as Sophie launched herself into her parents' arms, and the three of them embraced as a family for the first time as husband, wife, and daughter. The reception was held in the same garden, with tables scattered under the trees and more string lights creating a magical atmosphere as the sun began to set. Grace's family had traveled from South Carolina, bringing with them traditional dishes and warm hugs for their new son-in-law and granddaughter. "She's perfect for you," Grace's mother Ruth told Daniel as they watched Grace dance with Sophie to a slow song. "I haven't seen my daughter this happy since before Marcus died." "She's perfect for us," Daniel corrected. "She's made us a real family." During dinner, Daniel stood to make a toast. He looked around the table at the faces of people who had become dear to him, Grace's family, his business colleagues who had become true friends, and the neighbors who had watched Sophie grow up. "6 months ago," Daniel began, "I thought I understood what success looked like. I thought it was measured in profits and achievements and recognition. But I was wrong." He turned to look at Grace, who was holding Sophie on her lap, both of them listening intently. "Success is sitting at this table with my wife and daughter, surrounded by people who love us. Success is knowing that Sophie will grow up with the most amazing mother anyone could ask for. Success is having Grace's love, her wisdom, her incredible heart as part of my life every single day." Daniel's voice grew thick with emotion. "Grace, you didn't just accept my proposal. You accepted my daughter as your own. You accepted my chaotic life and somehow made it beautiful. You accepted all my flaws and somehow loved me anyway. And Sophie," he continued, looking at his daughter, "you taught me what really matters. You showed me that love isn't complicated, it's simple and pure and given freely. You've been the bridge between Grace and me, showing us both what family could look like." Daniel raised his glass. "To Grace, who taught us both that love is something you do every single day. To Sophie, who never stopped believing we could be a real family. And to all of you for celebrating this perfect day with us." "To the Thompson family," the guests called out, raising their glasses. As the evening wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Daniel found a quiet moment with Grace and Sophie in the garden. The string lights twinkled overhead like stars, and the scent of roses filled the air. "How do you feel, Mrs. Thompson?" Daniel asked, pulling Grace close to his side. "Like the luckiest woman in the world," Grace replied. "Like all my dreams came true at once." "And you, Miss Sophie Thompson? How do you feel about having Grace as your official mommy now?" Sophie looked up at both of them with shining eyes. "I feel like we're finally complete. Like we're exactly who we're supposed to be." Daniel looked at his wife and daughter, at the love shining in their faces, at the garden where they had promised to love each other forever, and knew that Sophie was absolutely right. They were exactly who they were supposed to be. 1 year later, Daniel stood in the doorway of what had once been an elegant Victorian mansion and was now the Little Learners Academy, Grace's dream school brought to beautiful reality. The old house had been lovingly restored and converted into bright, cheerful classrooms while maintaining its homey charm. "Daddy, come see." Sophie called from the garden behind the school, where Grace was teaching a group of 6-year-olds about plant life cycles. "Mommy, Grace is showing us how beans grow." Daniel smiled, still feeling a warm rush of happiness every time Sophie called Grace Mommy so naturally. The transition had been seamless. Grace had legally adopted Sophie immediately after their wedding, and Sophie had embraced having a mother with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else in life. "Mr. Thompson," called Emma Chin, one of Grace's students, running up to him with soil-covered hands and a huge grin. "Look what we planted. Mrs. Thompson says in 2 weeks we'll see tiny green shoots." Daniel knelt down to examine Emma's small pot of planted bean seeds with appropriate seriousness. "That's very impressive, Emma. Are you going to take good care of it?" "Every day. Mrs. Thompson says taking care of something helps it grow big and strong, just like how families take care of each other." Daniel glanced over at Grace, who was patiently helping another child measure water for their plant. Even wearing an apron covered in dirt and with her hair escaping from its ponytail, she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. The school had been an immediate success, with a waiting list of parents desperate to enroll their children in Grace's nurturing environment. Grace had hired 2 other teachers who shared her philosophy of education through love and individual attention, and the 3 women had created something truly special. "How was your day?" Daniel asked Grace that evening as they cleaned up after dinner. It had become their routine. This quiet time together while Sophie did homework at the kitchen table, sharing the details of their days. "Wonderful," Grace said, her face glowing with satisfaction. "Tommy Martinez finally read a complete sentence today without help. He was so proud of himself, he asked if he could call his grandmother to tell her." "And did he?" "Of course. We called her right from the classroom. She cried happy tears and told him he was the smartest boy in the world." Daniel wrapped his arms around Grace from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're changing lives, you know that?" "We're changing lives," Grace corrected, leaning back against him. "None of this would be possible without your support. I just provided the building and the funding. You provided the heart and soul." "Speaking of which," Grace said, turning in his arms with a mischievous smile. I have some news. Good news, I hope? The best news. The education department wants to feature our school in their newsletter. They're calling our approach innovative and exactly what modern education needs. Daniel spun Grace around the kitchen, both of them laughing. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. There's more, Grace said, her eyes sparkling. They want to help us open a second location. There's a grant available for schools that demonstrate exceptional outcomes with diverse student populations. Grace, that's incredible. How do you feel about expanding? Grace looked thoughtful. Excited but also a little nervous. I want to make sure we don't lose the family feeling that makes our school special. We won't, Daniel assured her. Because you'll be overseeing it, and you understand that children need to feel loved and valued above all else. Did someone say loved and valued? Sophie piped up from the table, having finished her homework. Because I feel very loved and valued in this family. Come here you, Grace laughed, pulling Sophie into their embrace. You are the most loved and valued 8-year-old in the entire world. 9. Sophie corrected. I'm 9 now, remember? We had my birthday party last month with the chocolate cake and all my friends from school. 9 years old and already keeping us organized, Daniel said, ruffling Sophie's hair. What would we do without you? That weekend, the three of them visited the potential site for the second school. Sophie came along as their consulting expert on what kids want in a school, a title that made her puff up with importance. It needs really good windows, Sophie declared, walking through the empty building with serious concentration. Kids like to see outside and watch birds and clouds and stuff. Excellent point, Grace said, making notes. What else? A cozy library corner with soft pillows. And maybe a kitchen where kids can learn to cook healthy snacks. And definitely a garden like we have at Little Learners. Daniel watched Grace take notes on Sophie's suggestions with the same attention she would give to an education expert's recommendations. This was what made Grace special as an educator. She understood that children were the real experts on what they needed to learn and grow. I think this could work, Grace said finally, standing in what would become the main classroom. It has good bones, lots of natural light, and enough outdoor space for a proper garden. So we're doing this? Daniel asked. Opening a second school? Grace looked at him with eyes full of excitement and determination. We're doing this. Together, as a family, we're going to help even more children discover the joy of learning. Yes. Sophie cheered. More kids are going to get to have Mommy Grace as their teacher. That evening, as they worked together to put together a proposal for the grant, Daniel reflected on how much their lives had changed. A year ago, he had been a successful but lonely businessman, and Grace had been a devoted caregiver with hidden dreams. Now they were partners in every sense, in marriage, in parenting, and in building something meaningful that would outlast any business deal. Daniel, Grace said, looking up from her laptop, do you ever miss your old life? The traveling, the high-stakes meetings, the adrenaline of closing big deals. Daniel considered the question seriously. You know what I miss? What? Nothing. I don't miss any of it. This life, coming home to you and Sophie every night, being part of building something that helps children, knowing that my success is measured in bedtime stories read and school performances attended and family dinners shared. This is everything I never knew I wanted. Grace's eyes grew misty. Really? Really? Grace, you didn't just give me love, you gave me purpose. You showed me that the most important work anyone can do is love their family well and help others flourish. And you gave me the courage to dream again, Grace replied. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And you both gave me the best mommy in the world. Sophie added from her spot on the floor, where she was drawing pictures of the new school. Daniel and Grace laughed, pulling Sophie up onto the couch between them. You know what I think? Sophie said, snuggling between her parents. What do you think, sweetheart? Grace asked. I think we should have more family meetings like this, where we plan awesome things together. Maybe we could even think about giving me a little brother or sister to help with the schools. Daniel and Grace exchanged surprised glances over Sophie's head. Sophie, Daniel said carefully, what made you think about having a sibling? Well, Sophie said with 9-year-old logic, Emma at school has a baby brother, and she says having someone to take care of makes her feel very important. Plus, if we had a baby, they could be the first student at our new school when they get old enough. Grace and Daniel looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. They had been so focused on building their marriage and Grace's career that they hadn't seriously discussed expanding their family. That's an interesting idea, Sophie, Grace said gently. What do you think, Daniel? Daniel thought about it, about Sophie as a big sister, about Grace holding a baby, about their family growing even more complete. I think, Daniel said slowly, that we should definitely talk about it. As a family. Sophie clapped her hands in delight. Really? We might have a baby Thompson? We might, Grace said, her voice full of wonder at the possibility. But even if we don't, we're already perfect just the way we are. We are perfect, Sophie agreed. But we could be perfect with a baby too. As they sat there on the couch, surrounded by grant applications and school plans and Sophie's drawings of their future, Daniel felt a deep contentment settle over him. This was what happiness looked like, not the destination but the journey. Not a moment of triumph, but a lifetime of small, precious moments that added up to something beautiful. Whether they expanded their family or their schools, whether they faced challenges or celebrations, Daniel knew that they would face it all together, with love, with laughter, and with the unshakable foundation of knowing they belonged to each other. Grace had been right all those months ago when she told Sophie that love was something you did, not just something you felt. And every day, in countless small ways, they would continue to do love, for each other, for their students, for their community, and for whatever beautiful surprises the future might hold. I love our family, Sophie announced, settling more comfortably between her parents. So do I, Grace said, kissing the top of Sophie's head. Forever and always, Daniel added, pulling them both closer. Outside, the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, and inside the Thompson home, a perfect family dreamed together about all the wonderful tomorrows waiting for them. Dear amazing listeners, thank you so much for joining Daniel, Grace, and Sophie on their heartwarming journey to becoming a family. This story holds a special place in my heart because it shows how love can bloom in the most unexpected ways, and how sometimes the family we need finds us exactly when we need them most. I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in the story? Did Sophie's innocent wisdom touch your heart the way it touched mine? What do you think about Grace's transformation from caregiver to beloved wife and mother? And how do you feel about Daniel's journey from workaholic businessman to devoted family man? Also, I'm curious, do you think Daniel and Grace should expand their family with another child? Should they focus on growing their school network? What dreams do you think they should pursue next as a family? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps me understand what resonates with readers and inspires future stories. Don't forget to like this story if it warmed your heart, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that love and family come in many beautiful forms.